With Tom here and Charlie here and Michael here, we all couldn't help but seeing Tom's Twitter diatribe on being a conservative in the age of Trump. It was far preferable to the nonsense that he has tweeted previously about Led Zeppelin. But you know, it's so interesting, Tom, we're going to read through it, but when I have people come up to me now in airports and say, "Oh, I used to agree with you," and "Oh, I watch you, but I don't, agree with you now," I say, "Oh, you're liberal. That's okay. I love liberals too." You know, I'm a conservative, and I said, "Well, listen, you define conservative far different than I have for a quarter century, or Ronald Reagan did for 50 years, because I believe in balanced budgets. I believe in less debt. I believe in entitlement reform. I believe in fiscal responsibility. I believe in restrained, disciplined foreign policy. I believe in Reagan's foreign policy. I believe in a strong NATO. I believe in promoting democratic values across the globe. I believe checking Russian aggression. And I believe I could go on forever in all the ways that Republicans in 2018, in the age of Trump, are the antithesis of conservatism. But you talked a great deal about it in your Twitter feed. What are your thoughts?
Well, one thing you could add to that is you also believe in facts, which has kind of fallen out of vogue among self-described conservatives now. I wrote that because I was really tired of people hijacking the word conservative and declaring people like me and you and Max Boot and others as no longer conservative simply because we're rethinking some of the things that we once supported now that we live in an age where the Republican Party, which was once the vehicle for, as we're laying President Bush to rest, was once the vehicle for kind of moderate, conservative, sensible, prudent, intelligent kind of conservatism, and it's been captured by this emotionally charged, in some ways very, I don't even want to tar liberals with it, very unconservative kind of approach to things. And I just reacted against that to say, look, as you just did, what's conservative about having people turn to the national government and rally around someone who says, "I alone can fix it"? When did we become when did we become the party of, when did we become the party of Big Daddy, telling us that, that only he can fix it? These are fundamentally unconservative and anti-small R Republican virtues. These are not.
Oh yeah. On that note, we all criticize Barack Obama for talking about how he and we were the change that we have been waiting for, and this
seems so sweet now.
You can't. Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump jumped on this, but Elizabeth Warren and Barack Obama got skewered on conservative radio for 2 years, Charlie, for saying, "You don't build that business on your own."
Yeah.
We're all a part of that. And now Donald Trump is even taking it beyond what Barack Obama said then, which is, if I'm not here, the economy will collapse.
Well, that's what's so, disconcerting about all of this is watching, when you ran through the litany of what conservatives used to believe, that would be the same litany that I would have, and yet each and every point has been repudiated by Trump and by Trumpists.
By the way, of those 9 or 10 things I said, there's not a single one of them that Donald Trump or this Republican Congress is following.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is the core of the conservative message that we have run on for 50
what
years.
Are they getting?
And has been largely repudiated. In fact, look what's happening in Washington, D.C. right now as the nation remembers George H.W. Bush. Understand that everything that he represented has really been rejected by the modern Republican Party. Trumpism, and you just go look at the Twitter feeds and all of this, that they have rejected those values, they've rejected those ideas. And I think part of the problem is trying to figure out, can you separate the conservative grifter movement and the tribal movement, the infrastructure, from the ideas that you articulated before? And that's becoming increasingly difficult because the lights are going out on the right.
Michael Steele, there may be a reason for this. Donald Trump, it turns out, is not a conservative Republican. Big secret.
As we've been saying forever.
Until 3 years ago, he was a New York City Democrat, but we can put that to the side. Let's add into the conversation debt and deficits. The deficit's going to go up to $1 trillion with that tax cut that was passed about a year ago. That all seems to be forgotten by conservatives rallying around the president as well.
Well, it's big government Trumpism, and that's the buy-in. I will turn a blind eye to debts and deficits as long as I get a Supreme Court nominee. I will turn a blind eye to the way we engage on immigration as long as I get a tax cut. So what the president has effectively done has made the party more transactional. And everything is a tit for tat. And so it's a zero-sum opportunity. If you do better, then someone's going to do worse. And I don't want to have to deal with that. And so I love Charlie's last point, because for me, that becomes the core of this discussion going forward. We have to recognize that there is a difference between republicanism and conservatism as it is formed in the land of Trump. And so that break is the key piece here. Do we see Joe's list? Joe's list could become the new republicanism, because it is anchored in some core values that relate back to the founding of the party. And what this new conservatism really is Trumpism. And maybe it does its own thing. Maybe he goes off in this little new TV land or whatever he wants to create, and his folks will follow him. But for those of us who remain inside the party, Joe and Charlie and Tom, that's where our fight is going to be. That's our sweet spot. That list that Joe put out and so much more is where we need to engage for what we will call the new republicanism.
Tom, there's been a lot of introspection by conservatives, in some cases drawing a line all the way back to Newt Gingrich to explain why we are where we are. But can you speak about a more recent phenomenon, which is the purist wing, the arrival of the Tea Party, which seemed to want to just cut government with a meat axe, and it really wasn't focused on good government. It was more just focused on cutting everything and anything. Because when I go out and talk to the American people, conservatives, what they want is good government, not necessarily for this movement to have come in and just taken a meat axe approach to the budget.
I'm pleased to say that I was an early adopter on not supporting the Tea Party. I didn't like it when it arose. I thought it went off the rails quickly. I thought that the dangerous kind of tendencies that we're seeing now that Charlie and Michael talked about, the kind of grifter conservative movement was already, I think, embedded in the Tea Party, because it was completely a negative message. It was not to make government better, but to do two things. One, to destroy government for purely resentful and unfocused reasons that I think a lot of the people in the Tea Party didn't understand. It was just banding together to feel like they were part of something against a government they felt had been taken over. But the other was to say, look, if government has to exist, then I want it to direct all its benefits at me, which is a very, again, a very big government kind of approach. I mean, if you look at the way Donald Trump, you look at the way the Tea Party acted, and you look at the way Donald Trump talks to middle class and working class Americans, it is almost indistinguishable from the way that Democrats used to talk to poor and minority voters 40 years ago. With, it's not your fault, the system screwed you over, I'll fix it, we'll get you things. It's really not in any way a conservative movement, and I think that seeds of that were already in the Tea Party.
Tom, one of my favorite polls, I've repeated several times since then, in 2010, was a poll of Tea Party members who were so offended by Obamacare and the government creeping into their health care. They were asked if Washington should reform Medicare to make it more solvent. 74% said no. There is your new conservatism. Give it to me. Michael Steele, thank you. Tom Nichols, thanks so much. Charlie, can you stay with us? I have got a question for you on the other side of this, because I'm not so sure that there is a going back to the Republican Party. I'm not so sure that those conservative principles will ever be welcome to the Republican Party. I'm going to ask you where those of us wandering in the wilderness should go. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.